Glorious Revolt, and New England Indigenous forced to bolt. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are at Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is September 18th, 2020. And on this date in history, 50 years ago today, Jimi Hendrix died.
The little war known as the Beaver Wars. This is really a war that was between the Huron and the Iroquois that the French and Dutch used as an opportunity to arm the other side and see if they could expand the territory. So eventually, the Huron and the French would fight against the Iroquois and the Dutch. They were hunting beaver to the brink of extinction. It was so bad that beaver disappeared from that part of the country until about 2 years ago when they started to move back up into the Detroit area. So that's kind of part of the lane that we're looking at right here. So the Huron traded with Canadian groups, and the Iroquois raided the Huron. And eventually, the Iroquois will win because the Dutch gave them guns, and they almost completely wipe out the Huron. So this is a really short battle, but it kind of takes the French out of the area and pushes them up into Canada. So if you remember the story about what happened in the English Civil War, Charles the First raised taxes, ruled without Parliament, eventually because of an invasion, was forced to Parliament back in and finds himself decapitated without his head on his body. So Oliver Cromwell ran the country for 11 years and until his death. His son was not strong enough, so they decided that they were going to approach the children of Charles the First. And so that takes them to Charles the Second. So in 1660, he's restored to the throne, but he's told, you have to share power, which he didn't have a problem with doing, and he went ahead and expanded colonization. Now, at this time, the English were trying to raise some more money, and what better way to do that than through taxes? So, how do you know how much money you can tax? Because there's not income tax forms or anything like that. So the solution that they had was they would stop all the trading by the Dutch and pirates and anyone else, and you could only trade with with British ships or English ships. Sorry, the British still don't exist for another 47 years. Okay, so the Navigation Act of 1660 required all goods to be transported on English ships to and from the colonies. So this cut out a lot of work of privateers, or basically what you might call pirates, but they weren't really a pirate in what you might think. They were just people that would ship products a little bit cheaper, and they didn't pay a lot of the taxes. They would trade mainly with the West Indies and the colonies. So that's where the colonies got the majority of their supplies because a greater number of people moved to the Caribbean than they did to the Americas. New York, we haven't really talked about them, but New York was actually settled and claimed by the Dutch in 1609 by Henry Hudson. He is the guy on the left-hand side of the screen who looks like he's wearing a dog collar for a dog that just had the most intimate of surgeries, removing things. So anyway, so they called this new land New Netherland. Again, remember, whenever things are named, people put zero effort into naming them. Okay, so they called the area New Netherland, and the capital was called New Amsterdam. Now, one thing about the Dutch, anyone could buy land. Did not It did not matter what your race was. Didn't matter your religious beliefs, your creed, political affiliations. If you had money, they sold it to you. And if you were African, if you were black, I was going to say African American, but there's not an, the term just doesn't work at that point. And well, if you were of African descent, you could buy land there. Okay, so eventually, what would happen is Charles II uh, invaded the New Netherlands, which is New York, and he gave it to his brother James II. James II, since his brother's a king, he needs a solid title also, so he gets a title, the Duke of York. So they decided to name this land New York. Sorry, I know most of you are like, oh my God, what's he going to say? What's he going to say? It's just New York. It's not a lot of effort. So the Carolinas are named after King Charles II. That makes sense, right? Charles, Carolina, yeah, pretty much the same. So North Carolina didn't grow very quickly. They grew tobacco and they were making ships. Okay, so they're either making the ships or sending supplies to make ships. Many of the people that lived in the Carolinas actually came from the West Indies, or really, that's West Indies or the Caribbean. They enslaved about 10,000 Indies, 10,000 of Savannah Indians, uh, and sent them to the West Indies. So back to the Caribbean, uh, where they were from, is where they sent the enslaved Native Americans. Uh, and South Carolina became a place to grow sugar cane, which increased slavery because there's a lot of labor involved in making sugar. Important things to come out of the Carolinas is John Locke, mainly because of the concepts he comes up with. He writes a book called The Two Treaties on Government. Okay, and it said all people were born with natural rights, and this is life, liberty, and for those of you who just said the pursuit of happiness, it was actually property. Okay, Thomas Jefferson went with the same type of concept, but he thought that pursuit of happiness sounded a lot more poetic, and that's why he decided to use that. John Locke thought that governments were in place to protect the people, and if the government didn't protect the people were justified to change the government to something that would protect them. Okay? For the right to overthrow the government. These are all American principles, and a lot of these come from John Locke, who was also quite handsome if you don't like attractive people. Now, moving on to Philip's War. Okay, so let's first talk about who King Philip is. Obviously, King Philip is the king of England, right? Wrong. The king of England at the time is Charles II. So then King Philip must have been the king of France. Nope, that was King Louis. He was not a king of any of these places. In fact, King Philip was the king of the Wampanoag Indians. Now, the Wampanoags should sound familiar because they are Squanto's tribe, the guy who saved all of them from starvation when they landed. Okay. By the way, King Philip's name in Wampanoag was actually Metacom. So, if you can explain to me how they got the name Philip out of Metacom, then you are truly brilliant. And that's it. That's all you get. So anyway, so Plymouth tried and executed three of the Wampanoag Indians because they were accused of murder. There's no evidence, and a lot of people at the time believed it was actually done by some of the other white settlers, not the white settlements. A settlement normally doesn't kill anyone, like in itself. It takes the people that live there to do it. Well, anyway, so after these three Wampanoag were killed, the Wampanoag attacked the colonists in retaliation. Okay, so this war goes on between the Wampanoag and the people of Plymouth. And 3 years later, it's a major turning point because from this point forward, there are almost zero Native Americans in New England. Okay, and English policy changed towards Native Americans, And this really helps set some of the foundations for the policies of the United States against Native Americans. Between this event and what I'm going to talk about in five, four, I wasn't ready. Oh yeah, I did that. Okay. So anyway, Bacon's Rebellion. Okay, this has nothing to do with the food. It's talking about that guy on the left hand side at the top. His name was Nathaniel Bacon. The guy at the bottom is William Berkeley. Now, this has to do with land and voting rights. And basically, what happened is uh, Nathaniel Bacon and his people wanted more land. Now, the problem was they were limited to land because it was controlled by the local Native Americans. So, whenever he went to talk to the governor said, no, you can't have this land. So then Bacon starts a rebellion. He ends up being killed. And in the end, he got what he wanted anyway. So Bacon, well, not Bacon because Bacon was dead, but his followers get all this land, and it really showed that you had to have available land for farmers. You had all of these former indentured servants and wealthy people who were trying to expand, and in order to do that, they had to take land away from the natives. And this really increases the purchasing of African slaves. William Penn. Now, William Penn's uh, father was owed a lot of money by the King of England. Okay, so to pay off this debt, they give all this land to William Penn that he uses for the Quakers. Okay, this is known as a religious society of friends, and they had a couple of beliefs. One that religion didn't need churches or ministers because everyone was a minister and everywhere was a church. Okay, regardless of religious affiliation, if that were true, then everyone would probably be pretty good to each other. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe everyone would be horrible. I don't know. Where did I backtrack there? So anyway, they also advocated pacifism. Okay, and this is an opposition to violence, so they would refuse to fight. Now, one of the weird truths is Hollywood, or someone who is a pacifist, by the end of the movie, that person ends up violently killing someone. And I can only cite two movies off the top of my head. One of those is High Noon, where Grace Kelly ends up murdering the guy at the end, even though she was a pacifist who married a sheriff. And in what was it called? Was it Rambo? I think it was called Rambo. It was the final one of the Rambo, or no, it wasn't. It was the second to last of the Rambo movies. I forgot about the one that just came out. And at the end, you have the pacifist killing someone in the most violent way possible, like with a rock, like smashed him to death with a rock. It was awful. I'm sorry if I, messed up anyone right now because I know it's kind of, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and keep going, okay? And so this is Pennsylvania, okay? And Pennsylvania, by the way, also had a pretty nice relationship with Native Americans because they actually signed treaties and did the weird thing of keeping their promises. Now, William Penn also buys a piece of land called Delaware, and he named it after the military governor that was put in place there by the British. I'd like to say it was more interesting than that, but nope. It was a little bit less interesting than what I just explained. It's amazing. So Charles II dies. Okay, so then James II comes to the throne. Now who's James II? Are you saying it's the son? Well, if you think you're wrong. James II is the brother of Charles II. So James II is openly Catholic, and he tries to restore the kingdom under his control. Basically, he still believes in the divine right. Now, I can understand that a couple hundred years ago, but he saw his dad beheaded about 40 years earlier. His bald head was cut off his body. Okay? but he's still trying to rule in that way. Okay, so to get the colonies under control, he decided he was going to put all of the New England colonies into one colony called the Dominion of New England. That's Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. That's the area that we would call New England. Okay, it only lasted for 3 years, so it's not like it was a long-lasting effect. Okay, but it's going to be ended by the Glorious Revolution, which you would all know about had you gone into the future and listened to the next slide before this one. So here we go. So the Glorious Revolution. Okay, again, James II was pushing everyone's buttons, making everyone upset. So they decided that they were going to go to William of Orange. William of Orange was the third or fourth in line to be the king of the Netherlands. Okay, and by the way, you'll notice that I bolded the word "and." It's because that "and" is so important here that it needs to be bolded. Okay. By the way, the reason they went to William of Orange is his wife Mary was actually the daughter of James II, and they thought that they might be able to pull off a peaceful exchange of power between them. Okay. So I'm sorry. There. Okay. So Mary and William decided to go ahead and take England up on this offer, and they went and they took the throne of England in a bloodless coup d'état. Okay, if you've ever seen the word like COUP, that is a coup. Okay, so a coup d'état is an overthrow or an attempted overthrow. Okay, and they agreed to join the English Church, the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, and they also agreed to certain arrangements with Parliament, to where Parliament now had control of England. They created the English Bill of Rights, which limited the monarchy's power and guaranteed the rights of English citizens. So, this is important because of the English Bill of Rights, not just because we have a Bill of Rights, but you see limited power and guaranteed rights of citizens. Now this goes hand in hand with things like Jamestown, the first legislative or lawmaking group. That's the House of Burgesses in Virginia. In Maryland, you have the Toleration Act, which gave religious freedom to all Christians. You have the General Court in Massachusetts, which let people make their own laws and elect their own leaders. You have, let me see, what else do we have? We, of course, have the English Bill of Rights, which limits power. And all of these things are really cornerstones. You have John Locke and these concepts of life, liberty, and property, and natural rights. All of these things are kind of going to come and work together so that we can create the type of government we have here, because you have to have some place where these things are tested. So, the English colonies, William and Mary implemented a system called writs of assistance, where you could seize anything, search and seizure, without any type of search warrant. Okay, admiralty courts are where they would prosecute people. So you were picked up and you were sent to Nova Scotia in Canada, and you would see a judge there who had no idea about the community you lived in. And most of the time, the rulings were really harsh. They held people in jail sometimes for years while you were waiting on your trial. They did a lot of things to make the colonies a little bit upset at this point. George the First and George the Second, who would take over after William and Mary, because their daughter Anne was barren. George the First and Second, they had this attitude of citing trade and neglect. So they didn't really worry what was happening in the colonies because they had a lot going on in Great Britain. So it's really under George the First we had the creation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Once they brought him in, he was a Hanover, so he was a This is whenever England and Scotland united. And so, by the way, Scotland almost left about 2 years ago, and I think right now, if they had it all to do over again, they would have left as violently and quickly as they could have. So basically, this is where you see the creation of the British Empire. Okay, so I'm going to keep on moving. By the way, look at this lovely map to the right. That gives you kind of a good view of what it looked like back then. Okay, I'm moving on. Okay, so let's talk about Georgia for a minute. Georgia was named for King George II. Okay, uh, it was created by James Oglethorpe, and the thought there was going to be twofold. One, they wanted a buffer zone between the Carolinas and the Spanish territory of Florida, so they needed to put a piece of land there where the good people would be attacked. So who did they want to put between the Carolinas and Florida? Let's go with a bunch of criminals. Okay. Now, what kind of criminals were they? They were people that did not pay their debt. So basically, at this time, if you owed money and you didn't pay money, they put you in jail until you pay back your debts. Sorry, I'm letting that sink in with you for just a minute. Now, the question you should be asking is, how can you pay back your debt if you're in jail and you can't work to pay back your debt? Well, that's what you're thinking. You're right. That's a problem. Now, the reason they would do that is, imagine if all of you owe me money and I decide that Brian over here doesn't have to pay, doesn't have to pay me back because, his wife died or, his cat has a drug problem, whatever the case may be. So if I make it so that he doesn't have to pay his debts, then that can affect the rest of you paying your debts. So I put him in jail to kind of as a sign to tell everyone else to pay your debt. Also, the hope is that his family or his friends like him enough so that they will raise the money to pay off his debt and then have him pay them off. Okay? So this is the whole concept behind, they have debtors' prisons everywhere. So you could come over here to the United States and you wouldn't go to jail anymore if you didn't pay off your debt. Okay? So you could kind of work off your debt. So that's the whole idea of creating this so that if the Spanish attacked, they would just kill a bunch of criminals who hadn't paid their debts. Then they would never pay them because they'd be dead. Okay, so this is what the colonies look like. It says in the 1600s, but this is a lie because we know that Georgia was founded in 1733 and still made its way onto the map. Okay, but up above this is all pretty accurate. You can see here that you don't have the normal lines of territory, and you don't have any the existence of Maine. Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island were the same basic shapes there. They, along with Delaware, and New Jersey, but the rest of the states just quite weren't what they are today because settlement was really limited because of access to water, and the big mountain range had kind of blocked them from moving further west. So this brings us to the end of notes today. I hope everyone had a good time. I hope everyone's happy, and I hope everyone wins the lottery and has everything they ever wanted. Wow. So, I will leave you on this note. I'll bid you adieu and say good luck. And if you happen to have a great day tomorrow, then have an extra one on me. I'll see you soon. This is Christopher Paulo DMA tuning out or turning out for what?